A bundle of wet fur slipped sideways against a torn cloak. A thin hand caught it and pushed it back up against a hollow chest. A boot punched through crusted snow up to the knee. The boot pulled itself out and stepped forward again. 11 small bodies shifted under the cloak. 11 small heartbeats. 11 small mouths pressed for warmth against ribs that had no warmth left at all to give them back. A blizzard tore sideways across the pass and erased the next step before the boot could find it. The hand reached up again. The bundle settled. The boot went on. A whisper, low and cracked, counted backwards from 11 and started over again. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the curtain of blowing snow, a single deep wolfhound bark answered the counting in the dark. Whose hound was that out there at all? Stay with me on this one. Her name was Myria. She had been an omega of the Ironclaw pack for 19 winters before the night her father walked her to the lodge of the elder she had been promised to since she was 12, and she had stood at the door, and she had said no. She had not raised her voice. She had not wept. She had simply said no in front of the elder and her father, and the 3 pack witnesses required for a binding mating, and the pack had stripped her of her place by sundown. They had cut the leather pack cord from her wrist with a ceremonial knife. They had pulled the warm Ironclaw cloak from her shoulders and left her standing barefoot in the snow at the edge of the lodge fire. They had given her 3 days' walking supply of dried meat and a torn shepherd's cloak that had belonged to a dead ant, and they had pointed her toward the high pass north toward neutral territory. They had not given her a hound. The pack hounds had stood at the kennel fence and watched her go. Her own pup hound, Bryn, the one she had hand-raised since the litter was 4 days old, had been kept inside the lodge by force. Myria had heard Bryn cry through the wooden walls as she walked out of the pack lands. That had been 4 days ago. She had walked through 1 full storm already and slept twice without fire, and she had not eaten the dried meat because she had reached the abandoned kennel hut at the foot of the high pass on the 2nd morning and found something that had changed every plan she had made for the rest of her life. She had found 11 wolfhound pups. She had found them inside the hut, curled against the cold body of their mother. The mother was a frostfang bitch she did not recognize, gaunt and ribbed, frozen in a thin nest of straw. The pups were all alive. All 11. She had counted them 3 times, by sight, by touch under the cloak, by the small movement of each muzzle against her palm. They had been 3 days from death. She had taken them. She had not made the decision the way decisions are usually made. She had simply opened her own torn cloak and gathered the pups against her chest and tied the cloak shut with the leather thong she had used to tie her hair as a child. She had set them against her ribs in 2 rows. She had stood up. She had stepped over the body of the mother. She had walked out into the storm. She had not slept since. The pups had nursed at the cloth for warmth and slept against her skin. The pass climbed steeply toward the ridge. The storm had not let up for 2 nights. Myria had stopped counting her own steps somewhere around the 2nd dusk. She had started counting the heartbeats under her cloak instead. 11. She counted them every few hundred steps. 11. She counted them when the wind pushed her sideways against a rock face. 11. She counted them when she fell to her knees on the 3rd morning and could not get up for a long time. 11. She got up. 3 days into the blizzard, her knees gave out a 2nd time and she stayed down longer. The pups against her chest did not move very much. She made herself count them. 11. She made herself stand. The pass had narrowed here to a knife edge between 2 cliffs and the wind cut across. It sideways so hard that she had to put both palms flat against the rock to her left to keep from being pushed off the right edge. She walked the knife edge with her cheek pressed against the cliff. The bundle against her chest dragged against the rock. The smallest pup, the one she had named in her head as number 11, squirmed once and pressed harder for warmth. She could feel its small ribs through her cloak. She counted 11 heartbeats and walked another 40 paces. She counted 11 again. She walked another 40. She thought, somewhere in the back of her mind that was still working, that she was going to die on this ridge before sunrise. She thought she would lie down somewhere out of the wind, and the pups would lie down on top of her, and they would all freeze together in one warm bundle, and somebody in the spring would find a small heap of bones and not know what had happened. She thought about that for a long minute, and then she made herself stop thinking about it. She counted to 11 again. She walked another 40 paces. The wind dropped briefly for the first time in 3 days, and through the gap in the storm she saw the ridgeline ahead of her, and through the ridgeline she saw the long pale shape of the neutral pass winding down the far side toward the lower forests. She had 3 more miles. Maybe 4. She had counted the distance from memory at the abandoned kennel hut, and she had been wrong about distances before, but she did not think she was wrong by much. She set her hand under the bundle and held the smallest pup in place. She stepped forward. The wind picked up again and slammed her sideways against the cliff. She held on. She stepped again. She was crying now, not from grief and not from pain, but from the cold-locked muscles in her face that no longer knew the difference between weeping and breathing. The tears froze before they reached her chin. She did not wipe them. She counted 11. She walked. Halfway through that long ridge, she heard the first bark. She thought she had imagined it. She stopped. The wind dropped again briefly. The bark came again. It was deep, very deep, the kind of deep wolfhound bark she had not heard since she was a girl. She turned her head against the cliff and tried to find the direction of the sound. It came from somewhere ahead of her on the pass, slightly downhill, hidden by a curtain of blowing snow. It came again. It was answered by a second bark, lighter, younger, the kind of bark a half-grown hound makes when it is excited. It was answered by a third bark, and then a fourth, and then a low chorus of 3 or 4 more, until the curtain of snow ahead of her seemed to be full of barking wolfhounds. She did not move. The pups against her chest did not move either. She thought for a second that the Ironclaw pack had sent trackers after her, and she thought about laying the bundle of pups down behind a rock and walking off the cliff into the storm so that the trackers would find the pups alive and not bother with her. She thought about that for a second. Then the wind dropped a third time, and through the gap she saw, 200 paces ahead of her on the pass, the silhouette of a single very large wolfhound standing in the middle of the trail facing her. Not a pack tracker hound. A wolfhound. A young female. Her ears were forward. Her tail was high. She made a sound that was not a bark and not a growl. She made a sound that Myria knew. Myria stepped away from the cliff. She walked toward the hound. The hound walked toward her. The wind held back. 20 paces apart, 10-5. The hound stopped in front of her. The hound lifted her front paws onto Myria's chest, gently, over the bundle of pups, and pressed her great gray head against Myria's neck. Myria put her arms around the hound and did not let go for a long time. The hound was Bryn. The hound was her own pup hound, the one she had hand-raised, the one the Ironclaw pack had kept inside the lodge by force 4 nights ago. Bryn was here. Bryn was at her chest. Bryn had found her on the ridge in a blizzard. Myria did not understand how. She did not try to understand. She set her forehead against Bryn's forehead and breathed and counted 11 and breathed. For a long minute Myria did not move. She held Bryn against her with both arms wrapped around the wolfhound's gray shoulders and her cheek pressed into the warm fur. She forgot the bundle at her chest for the length of 3 breaths. She forgot the storm. She forgot the cliff. She forgot the Ironclaw lodge and the elder she had refused and the burned cloak. She held her hound, and the hound held her back, and the long ridge was very quiet because the wind had finally stopped. The pups against her ribs shifted under the cloak. She counted them. 11. She found her hand on Bryn's shoulder and stroked the fur there with her thumb the way she had stroked Bryn as a pup. Bryn pressed harder. She felt the long, slow heartbeat of her hound against her own ribs. She closed her eyes for a single long breath. Then she opened them. She lifted her head off Bryn's neck. She looked past Bryn down the trail. Behind Bryn, in a silent line stretched back along the ridge into the curtain of blowing snow, stood 12 Frostfang sentries. They were all wolfhounds. They had been moving up the pass at the heel of Bryn for 3 days. Myria could see the lead silhouette behind Bryn now that the wind had dropped. It was a wolfhound she did not recognize, taller than Bryn, broader, gray to the muzzle, with the steel-blue eye that Frostfang bred for in their senior pack hounds. Behind that hound stood the others, in pairs, calm, ears forward. None of them moved. None of them barked again. They watched her. She watched them back. She did not let go of Bryn. The bundle of pups at her chest stayed still. The smallest pup pressed against her ribs and did not whimper. Far back at the very end of the silent line, almost lost in the snow curtain, she could just see the silhouette of a man. He was tall. He was wrapped in a heavy Frostfang gray cloak. He carried no weapon. He was standing very still, watching her, the way the wolfhounds were watching her. He did not call out. He did not step forward. He waited for her to come to him. Myria laid her hand on Bryn's shoulder and stood up out of the embrace. She did not look at the silhouettes of the sentries. She looked only at Bryn. She asked Bryn quietly where Bryn had been. Bryn pressed against her thigh and walked beside her. Myria took one step toward the silent line. The lead Frostfang hound at the head of the line lowered his head, slightly, in a way Myria had only ever seen pack hounds do for the keeper of their own kennel. She took another step. The line of hounds parted in front of her, soundlessly, the way pack hounds part for the matron of the lodge. She walked between them. They closed behind her. She walked the length of the silent line with Bryn at her thigh and the bundle of 11 pups against her chest, and at the end of the line, the man in the gray cloak waited. He pushed back his hood as she got close. His face was younger than she had thought from the silhouette. He had a thick dark beard going silver at the chin. His eyes were the same steel blue as the lead hound's. He did not speak as she came up. He looked at her face. He looked at the bundle at her chest. He looked at Bryn beside her. He kneeled. He kneeled in the snow on the ridge with the 12 sentries behind him and the storm thinning around them, and he lifted his hands palm up toward her, and he waited. Myria did not move for a long second. The pups against her chest had stopped shifting. Bryn pressed her side and stood with her ears forward, watching the kneeling man. Myria finally understood, looking down at him, that he was waiting for her to give him the bundle. She did not give it yet. She kneeled too, slowly, knees buckling on the way down, and Bryn stepped in to catch her shoulder so she did not fall the rest of the way. She found her balance. She kneeled facing him in the snow. She set both her thin hands under the bundle and lifted it carefully out of her cloak. 11 small pups. She counted them by feel one last time. 11. She held the bundle out toward the kneeling man. He took it from her with both hands. He did not look down at the pups. He kept his eyes on her face. He stood slowly, holding the bundle the way a father holds a newborn. He turned to the lead Frostfang hound behind him and gave a small command Myria did not catch, and the lead hound padded forward and pressed his great gray skull against the bundle in the man's arms. The lead hound made a low sound deep in his throat. The 11 pups inside the bundle answered him in 11 small voices. The man closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked back down at Myria, still on her knees in the snow. He spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse and quiet. He said her name. He said it the way the Ironclaw elders had not said it in 4 days. He said it the way her father had not said it in 4 days. He said it like a name that belonged to a person who was welcome somewhere. Myria did not answer. She could not get her mouth to make the right shape. Bryn pressed harder against her side. The man set the bundle of pups gently down on the folded inside of his own cloak across his knee. He kneeled again. He reached out his bare hand and laid it on Myria's frozen cheek. His hand was warm. She did not flinch. She had not been touched by a warm hand in 4 days. She let her eyes close for a half-second. She opened them again. The man said his own name. He said he was the banished alpha of Frostfang. He had been driven out of his own pack 3 winters ago for the same crime that had driven the mother of the pups out 4 winters before that. The same crime he saw in Myria's torn cloak the moment Bryn had run up onto the ridge ahead of him 3 days back. He said he had been raising the sentry hounds in a hidden lodge on the far side of the pass since his banishment. He said Bryn had come to his hidden lodge 2 nights ago, dragging a torn piece of an ironclaw lodge wall in her teeth, and had not eaten or rested until the sentries had followed her back up the pass. He said they had been tracking Myria's scent for 30 miles. He said the pups belonged to a frostfang bitch he had been searching for through 2 winters. He said her name. The bitch's name was the same as his sister's. He did not explain that. Myria did not ask. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. She kept her eyes on his face. He held her gaze. He kept his bare hand on her cheek. The wind dropped completely now. The storm broke open above them, and a long shaft of pale sun came down across the ridge and lit the line of silent sentries from above. The 11 pups inside the bundle on his knee made a small chorus of contented sounds for the first time in 3 days. Bryn thumped her tail once against the packed snow. Myria finally let herself lean forward. She set her forehead against the banished Alpha's shoulder. He did not pull her closer. He did not push her back. He held her there. The bundle of pups breathed against both of them. The silent sentries stood watch around them. The pass held them all in a long, quiet pool of breaking sunlight. He did not let her walk back down the pass on her own feet. He lifted her, gently, the bundle of pups still nested between them, and Bryn fell in at his heel, and the lead Frostfang hound walked point ahead of them, and the 11 sentries closed in a moving ring around them as he carried her down the trail toward the lower forests. The snow was deep, but the lead hound broke a clear path with his chest. The bundle of pups against her rib stopped shivering for the first time in 3 days. Myria could feel each small heartbeat begin to slow into a real sleep, the kind of sleep pups have not been able to find since the night their mother stopped breathing in the kennel hut. She counted them. 11. She closed her eyes for a few minutes against the banished Alpha's shoulder. When she opened them, the pass had widened and the trees had begun. The first stand of dark pines marked the edge of Frostfang neutral territory. He carried her another mile into the pines before he stopped at a small clearing where a low pine-roofed lodge crouched against the side of a stone outcrop, half buried in drift, smoke curling from a single chimney. He set her down on the threshold log, and Bryn stepped up beside her and laid her head across Myria's lap. The banished Alpha kicked the lodge door open, and a wave of warm air rolled out across the snow and washed over the pups and over Myria and over Bryn at the threshold. He carried the bundle of 11 inside first. He laid them carefully on a thick fern near the fire. He came back for Myria. He lifted her again and carried her inside and set her on the same fur with the pups arranged around her, and Bryn padded in last and curled against her back. The 11 sentry hounds settled in pairs along the walls of the lodge, calm, ears forward, watching the fire. The lead Frostfang hound lay across the threshold. The banished Alpha kneeled beside the fur and pulled a wool blanket up to Myria's chin and tucked it under her shoulder. He did not speak for a while. He worked. He poured warm broth from an iron pot into a wooden bowl and held the bowl to her lips. She drank. She drank again. He fed her the broth a slow sip at a time, the way you feed a pup who has been starved too long to swallow a whole bowl. He fed her until the bowl was empty. He set the bowl aside. He sat down on the fur beside her and rested his back against the wall of the lodge. He laid his palm on Bryn's shoulder. Bryn thumped her tail once. He laid his other palm on the closest pup at Myria's ribs. The pup pressed its small head into his hand. Myria watched him do this. She watched him for a long time. He met her eyes. He said quietly that the pups would all live. He said the smallest pup, the one she had counted as 11, was the most stubborn pup he had ever seen and would outlive every hound in this lodge. He said Bryn had refused to eat for 2 days at his hidden lodge because she had known Myria was still on the pass. He said his sentries had wanted to leave at first light yesterday, and he had made them wait one more night because the storm had been too thick to cross. He said Bryn had not waited. Bryn had gone out into the storm alone at midnight, and the sentries had followed her trail at dawn. He said he had followed last, because by then Bryn was already most of the way to Myria, and there had been no overtaking her. He said Bryn had loved Myria more than the Ironclaw Lodge had ever deserved a hound's love. He said this without bitterness. Myria cried then, for the first time in 4 days. She cried quietly into the fur, her face turned into the warm pelt of Bryn's neck, the pups breathing against her ribs, the banished alpha's hand still on the smallest pup's head. He did not move. He let her cry. The fire snapped and warmed her cheek. The lodge held them all. When she woke, hours later, the lodge was full of soft afternoon light through the single shutter, and the 11 pups had been moved into a thick straw-lined basket beside the fire, and a wet nurse hound she did not know, a young frostfang female, was lying on her side with all 11 pups nursing along her belly. Myria counted them. 11. She let her head fall back on the fur. Bryn was still against her back. The banished alpha was sitting, cross-legged at the fire, mending a broken leather harness with a bone needle. He looked up when she stirred. He smiled slowly, the way a man smiles when he has not had a reason to smile in a long winter. He set the harness aside and brought her another bowl of broth, and she sat up to drink it. She drank it herself this time. He sat beside her. He said the sentries had brought down a fresh deer at dusk, and there was meat for the lodge. He said the pups had been fed and warmed and would live the night. He said Bryn had eaten her first meal in 3 days. He said Myria was safe. He said the Ironclaw pack would not come here, would not find this lodge, would not have a reason to look across the pass for a banished Omega and a litter of frostfang pups they did not know existed. He said she could stay here as long as she needed. He said she could stay here as long as she wanted. He did not say more than that. He did not press her. He left her with the broth and went back to the fire and the harness. Myria finished the broth. She set the bowl down. She watched the 11 pups nursing along the side of the strange frostfang nurse hound. She watched Bryn breathing slow and heavy at her back. She watched the man at the fire mending the leather harness with steady hands. Outside the lodge, in the long late afternoon, she heard the sentry hounds begin to howl, one by one, in a slow rising call that lifted up off the pines and rolled out across the ridges and the lower forests and back toward the Ironclaw Pass. It was not a war howl. It was a pack howl. It was a long, welcome howl, sent out so far that anyone who had ever known either pack would hear it and know what it meant. Myria closed her eyes. She listened until the last note faded. The 11 pups against the nurse hound's belly did not stir. Bryn breathed steady at her back. The fire crackled. And somewhere across the long ridge, in the lodges of the Ironclaw pack that had stripped her cord and burned her cloak and taken her hound from her by force, every elder and every pack witness who had stood in the door 4 nights ago heard the answering frostfang howls echo back from across the valley, and not one of them lifted a voice to answer. Not one. The pack she had been rejected by stood silent in the cold of their own lodges, and Myria, warm in a stranger's lodge with 11 pups and her own hound at her back, finally fell into a real sleep for the first time in 4 days. And the banished alpha at the fire did not look up when she fell asleep. He kept mending the harness. He kept the fire fed. He kept watch on the door. And the 11 sentries lay in pairs around the lodge wall, breathing slow, and the long pale light through the shutter began to fade toward dusk, and the lodge held them all. She slept through the dusk and through the early dark and into the deep middle of the night. She woke once around moonrise to the sound of a single pup making a small, contented noise against the nurse hound's belly, and she lifted her head to count the pups by feel in the firelight, and there were 11. She let her head fall back. She slept again. She woke a second time to the sound of Bryn, pressing her cold nose against the cheek of the banished alpha at the fire. The man set his palm on Bryn's skull. Bryn patted back. Bryn lay down against Myria's back. Myria slept again. She slept through the long, quiet hours before dawn the way she had not slept in many years. When she woke at last, the lodge was full of pale gray morning, and the fire was banked low, and the 11 pups were curled against the nurse hound in a sleeping pile, and the sentry hounds were stretched out along the walls, and the banished Alpha was sitting by the door with a cup of something warm in his hand and his eyes on her face. He smiled slowly when she met his eye. He brought the cup to her. It was a cup of pine needle tea, sweet and bitter, the way her own mother had made it on cold mornings. She drank it. She set the cup down. He kneeled beside her on the fur and reached out his hand, palm up, and she set her thin hand inside his palm, and he closed his fingers around hers, and he held her hand for a long, quiet moment without speaking. Then he let her go. He went to the basket of pups and lifted the smallest pup out, the one she had counted as 11. He brought the pup to her. He set the pup in her palm. The pup, sleepy and warm and clean for the first time in 4 days, pressed its small head into her thumb. Myria laid the pup against her own chest under the wool blanket, and the pup found her heartbeat the way it had found her heartbeat on the ridge, and the pup slept. Bryn pressed her muzzle against the pup. The banished Alpha sat back on his heels and watched her. He did not say anything for a long time. He finally said, quietly, that the sentry hounds had reported the long pack howl at dusk had reached all the way to the Ironclaw Ridge before it died, and that not a single Ironclaw voice had answered it. Not the elder she had refused. Not her father. Not even the pack witnesses. He said the silence from Ironclaw was the loudest answer a pack could give. He said the silence meant she was free of them, fully and finally free. He said no one would come for her. He said no one would come for the pups. He said no one would come for Bryn. He said the lodge was hers as long as she wanted it. He said the litter was hers as long as she wanted them. He said he himself was nothing more than another banished Alpha in a hidden lodge in the pines, and she owed him nothing more than the breath she was breathing right now, and he asked her, very quietly, what she wanted to do next. Myria did not answer right away. She held the pup against her chest. She held Bryn at her back. She held the warm cup of pine tea between her free hand and her ribs. She watched the firelight on the wall of the lodge. She watched the 11 pups breathing in their pile at the basket. She watched the sentries breathing slow against the wall. She watched the kneeling man at the fur beside her. She finally said, quiet, that she wanted to stay. She said it only once. She did not need to say it twice. The banished Alpha closed his eyes for a single breath. He opened them. He nodded. He did not smile this time. He did not need to. He laid his palm flat on the fur beside her, palm up, and she set her hand inside his again, and they stayed like that a long time, while the pups slept and Bryn breathed and the lodge held them and the morning lifted slowly over the long ridge behind them. Outside, the wind had stopped for good. The storm was over. The Ironclaw lodges stayed silent through the whole long morning, while in a hidden pine lodge on the far side of the pass, a banished Omega and a banished Alpha, and a litter of 11 pups built a new pack out of the bones of 2 old ones. And Myria finally understood that the pack she had been rejected by had been the wrong pack to begin with.